Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how AnnieRUOK did at the March beatleweight meet here in ARC. So before we quickly get going, I just want to say Annie kind of got Rosh put together at the last minute. The last couple of weeks have been exceptionally busy for me, as you guys have probably seen if you've been watching the last couple of videos. So Annie kind of, got put together on the morning of the competition, and like the electronics were resoldered on the morning of the competition. So there was a few bits and pieces that I was very unsure of going into this fight. However, having said that, before we go in, I actually did make some armor upgrades for Annie. So this here is an anti-horizontal front armor plate, which sits across the front here. And as you can see, it protects the actual standoffs at the front, which is really good. So that is Annie. That's our little kind of quick chat. She's looking pretty good at the moment, but she is also basically right on the weight limit. So I was unable to put googly eyes on, which is really disappointing. Annie with the googly eyes looks really good and also fights better somehow. So yeah, unfortunately, no googly eyes to give us the good luck this time around, but I'm going to have to rejig some stuff and see if I can find some extra weights and then get those eyes back on there, because that'd be really cool. Anyway, so moving on, our first fight is up against IronTooth. Now, those of you who saw Annie's last set of fights, IronTooth is a big horizontal spinner and actually prompted the need for the big anti-horizontal front wedges. So this is going to be a brutal fight up first. Let's hope the new anti-horizontal wedges do their job. Well, that was disappointing. So first and foremost, the new anti-horizontal wedge did its job. This is the 6mm version because I couldn't make weight for the 10mm version, but it did its job very well. There's a couple of kind of nice ice cream curls of plastic nibbled out here, and there was also a really big hit on this side that bent this in, but it saved the actual standoff, which is great because that means that Annie could keep fighting and I didn't have to try and change these standoffs, because these standoffs, while integral to getting everything to work to keep the weapon just up off the ground, they're also connected in such a way that they're connected through a whole bunch of stuff in this corner, which makes them a very difficult part to change. So any way I can protect those is good. Then, of course, I lost the weapon, and I lost the weapon because the pulley dropped off the motor shaft, which was basically my fault. Essentially, it was because in the rush build, I had not checked that that was still tight, and obviously it has come loose over the last couple of fights, and it dropped off, and then me worrying about why my weapon wasn't working because I didn't see the pulley drop off as it actually happened. Me worrying about that is why I wasn't quite concentrating, and then of course got pinged into the pit. So that loss was very unfortunate, but as I said, the new anti-horizontal armor looking real good. Very, very happy with that. That did exactly what it was supposed to do. So that's a good little tester of that, and it's going to mean that Annie can now go up against anything with a big weapon like that and come out the other side relatively unscathed. I mean, hopefully the next time we do something like that, we have a weapon so that we can hit back as well. But you know, at least right now we can tank those hits, which is a really good thing. So up next, we are going up against Sordid History, which is an overhead thwack bot with big foam wheels, which are really quite hard to hit or do any real damage to at all. So let's take a look at this, see how this goes. So that was quite a quick fight, and as I said, his wheels are very, very difficult to destroy. I did manage to hit them, I think once or twice, but it did nothing. Those foam wheels just wobble out of the way and nothing else really happens there. He did manage to get a thwack onto one of my wheels and break that off. I had to re-glue that going back into the next fight, but thankfully it only flapped a little bit of silicone around, so I still had lots of traction and lots of drive. Yeah, not that I really needed it. That fight was a quick win. That's basically it. So up next, we have another horizontal. This horizontal is Death of Rats. It's a horizontal with a blade higher up off the ground and also a lot shorter blade than IronTooth. So this blade is actually shorter than my blades, which means it's probably not going to hit me. However, for the sake of safety, or the sake of safety of my robot, I went back to the anti-horizontal wedge, but I also decided to swap Annie over and use the disc. So I have two different weapons. I have the bow tie bar, which is what is on Annie right now, and I have a disc. The disc is the one thing that I wanted to use every time I know there's not going to be weapon-to-weapon hits, or at least not really damaging weapon-to-weapon hits. Because the disc is a higher moment of inertia, so therefore should, in theory, hit a lot harder, but because all of that weight is further out, it's more susceptible to being hit by my opponent. So, especially if I'm fighting a big vertical spinner, I don't want to run the disc, but because this guy has a smaller horizontal bar, I thought it would be a great time to test out the disc. So let's take a look at how this goes. Hey, so the disc worked. The disc worked pretty well, in fact. It delivered some really big hits. Unfortunately, what happened there was the weapon belt broke. So at the moment on Annie, I am using some cheap cheap O-rings that, weirdly enough, I got from a supermarket here, or like a grocery store that just also happens to sell kind of weird and wonderful other items. I found a really cheap set of O-rings with diameters that I needed, so I just picked those up, and it meant I had a stack of spares for this competition. So I've broken the belt now, but I'm just going to replace it in through for the next fight. Yeah, but these cheap O-rings seem to snap pretty easily. They're not the greatest things on earth. I'm definitely going to have to find some better ones that are a little bit more resistant and can hold up to some temperature. Anyway, so despite all that, we did win that fight, which is nice. I mean, the ripping the wheel off did help us there in that regard. It was pretty easy then to maneuver around him and make sure that he pinged into the pit. There was also that really nice, good, big hit on his backplate. I actually cracked, I think it's like 10 mil HDPE or something, that I cracked with one weapon hit to it. So that's a fair amount of power. I'm pretty happy with how well that disc is working. However, we now need to replace the disc back over to the bow tie bar because we're going up against the new version of Lumberjack. Now, if you guys have seen any of the beatleweight fights I've already done, Lumberjack is a vertical spinner. It was a four-wheel drive vertical spinner. It is now a two-wheel drive vertical spinner with a much bigger spinning weapon. So yeah, this one is a little bit of a scary fight. Let's take a look at how it goes. Now that was a fight. Yeah, so good and bad points there. Obviously, the bow tie bar did work pretty well. I mean, we were getting some solid hits on his front wedge and kicking him out of the way. Most of those hits weren't at a straight run at him. They were mostly kind of from the side. So we would come in sideways and like kick him out across away from ourselves. Then the scary thing happened. It let out smoke, which is never a good thing. It means something has gone very, very badly wrong, and I assumed that it had actually been my ESC that had died and let out smoke, and therefore I wasn't going to have a weapon for the rest of the competition. Thankfully, that was not the case. What actually happened is the belt melted into the pulley on the bottom side here. So I'm just running ABS pulleys here. So yeah, the belt was running so fast that it melted into the pulley, and that's what the smoke was. The smoke was the belt melting and kind of burning its way through a little bit of this ABS that's on these pulleys. So that's what the smoke was. And if you actually look at the footage, or go back and look at the footage, it kicks out the back of the robot from underneath, so it's very clear that that's what that was. So thankfully, we didn't lose the ESC, which means I still have a weapon. But of course, then he did manage to flip me upside down, which wasn't great. He was able then to kind of do a lot more damage to me, and of course, I was trying to drive upside down, which is always an issue. I don't have a reversing switch on my controller, so I was trying to do the whole backwards is forwards and forwards is backwards thing, and then misjudged all of that and ended myself into the pit. That was quite the fight, though. He did also manage to almost eat through the entire 6mm HDPE front plate that we had there, and if he'd done that, the fight would have been over, because technically the battery was exposed. The battery does sit in the middle, but if the front plate breaks, there is a straight line of sight in through to the battery, so depending on the organizer, it can be disqualified for that, basically. Yeah, so thankfully he didn't actually eat through. I'll throw a photo up here and show you what I mean. He got 5mm through 6mm HDPE, and that is quite impressive. Yeah, so there you go. That was that fight. Next up, we have a fight that's going to be a lot easier than that one. This is the fight against Spinner B. Now, Spinner B is driven by the youngest son of the guy who drives Sordid History, and it is now a flail bot. Now, its fights that it's had this month have been rather interesting, because it spun the flail up and then basically like gyroed around the arena, basically making a massive racket and not really touching its opponent, but just, you know, basically being a bit showy. I'm not too worried about this fight, although my safety link does sit at the top of my robot, so one very, very lucky flail shot and I could lose that potentially. So let's take a look at how this one goes. Aww, that was a little bit sad. We didn't really get to actually have that fight because, yeah, they spun their weapon up and the weapon belt came off the pulley, and then that was basically that. I mean, I came in and took one hit at the wheel, which I think has slid the silicon off the wheel and jammed it around the axle shaft, and then that was that. Now, normally I would have tried to let that fight go on a little bit longer, but that was my last fight of the day, and at that point, Annie was sitting on the same number of points as two other robots, and we were all tied for second place, and it was the final fight of the day, so I knew that if I won that fight, then Annie would indeed get second place. So when the weapon didn't spin up, I kind of saw the opportunity to just cement the second place in. Spinner B was not in the running there. It was Sordid History and IronTooth were both sitting up there with me on second place. So I knew that by finishing the fight and winning the fight, yeah, we would get the second place. And that is what we did. Just like that. Boom. So now Annie has 2, actually.
She's got 2. She's got 1 from January and 1 from March. And she's doing really consistently at the moment. 2 second places in a row. All I need to do now is
fix this issue with the belts. So getting these belts, getting proper belts in is going to solve pretty much all of Annie's issues, I think. The difference between these 2 sets of fights is astounding. Annie held up a lot better, has done a lot better. There was no issues with loss of wheels. In fact, we took damage on the wheels, like we got hit by Lumberjack on these wheels, and they stayed in place and they stayed together. Everything worked pretty well. The only thing is those belts. So I'm going to find some tougher, more reliable O-rings that's going to run those belts. I might swap one of the pulleys over to aluminium if I can find somebody to machine that for me. And then we'll be done. That'll be it. We'll be good to go. Yeah, so there you go. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.